Behind the gilded gates of Kensington Palace, where tourists snap photographs and children wave tiny flags, a different story unfolds. One where whispered conversations in marble corridors carry more weight than parliamentary debates, where a single glance can topple carefully constructed lies, and where the most dangerous weapon isn't a sword, it's the truth. Captain James Whitmore has spent 15 years protecting the crown, but he's never faced anything like this. Standing at attention outside the princess's private chambers, his trained ears have become unwilling witnesses to a web of deception so intricate, so carefully woven, that exposing it could shatter the very foundation of everything he's sworn to protect. The question isn't whether the truth will come out. It's whether a young princess has the courage to wield it, and whether a loyal guard will risk everything to ensure she can. In a world where silence is golden and loyalty is currency, some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and some truths are too important to bury. Tonight, everything changes. Tonight, Princess Charlotte discovers that sometimes the greatest threat to the crown comes from within, and sometimes the only person who can save it is someone willing to lose everything in the process. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Windsor made her way through the East Wing corridors. At 22, she carried herself with the poise expected of someone third in line to the throne, but tonight, something felt different. The usual warmth she found in these familiar halls seemed absent, replaced by an unsettling chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. Captain James Whitmore stood at his post outside the Queen Consort's private office, his military bearing impeccable as always. Charlotte had known him since she was 7 years old, when he'd first been assigned to the Royal Protection Detail. Over the years, she'd come to read his subtle expressions like a book, and tonight, the tension in his jaw spoke volumes. "Good evening, Captain Whitmore," she said softly, pausing beside him. "Your Royal Highness," he replied with a slight bow, but his eyes held a warning she couldn't quite decipher. From behind the heavy oak door came the sound of raised voices. Charlotte recognized one immediately, Camilla's sharp tone cutting through the air like a blade. The other voice belonged to someone she couldn't identify, a woman speaking in urgent, hushed tones. "She's getting too curious," Camilla was saying. "The girl asks too many questions about the Foundation's finances. If she keeps digging..." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. They were talking about her. "Your Majesty, perhaps if we redirected her attention elsewhere," the unknown woman suggested. "The African charity visit could be moved up. Keep her busy with ceremonial duties while we finalize the transfers." "No," Camilla's voice was firm. "That won't be enough. She's too much like her grandmother, stubborn and perceptive. We need something more permanent." Captain Whitmore noticed the color drain from Charlotte's face. He'd been dreading this moment for months, knowing that eventually, the princess would stumble upon the truth he'd been carrying like a lead weight in his chest. Charlotte pressed closer to the door, her heart pounding. The conversation inside continued, each word more damaging than the last. "The memorial fund was the perfect cover," Camilla continued. £15 million channeled through shell companies to my family's accounts. No one would dare question donations made in Diana's memory. The mention of her grandmother's name hit Charlotte like a physical blow. The Diana Memorial Foundation, the charity her father had established to honor her grandmother's legacy, was being used to funnel money into Camilla's personal accounts. "And if Princess Charlotte discovers the truth?" the other woman asked. "She won't," Camilla replied coldly. "I've made sure of that. The amended trust documents ensure that when Charles passes, the children's inheritance will be significantly reduced. They'll be dependent on my goodwill for their allowances. A little financial pressure goes a long way in ensuring loyalty." Charlotte's legs nearly gave way beneath her. Not only was Camilla stealing from her grandmother's memorial fund, but she was also manipulating legal documents to steal her and her brother's inheritance. Captain Whitmore moved slightly, positioning himself between Charlotte and the hallway, creating a shield should anyone approach. He'd heard enough of these conversations to know they typically lasted another 10 minutes. His duty was to protect the royal family, but which members took precedence when they were plotting against each other? Inside the office, the conversation took an even darker turn. "What about the press leak regarding Charlotte's supposed eating disorder?" Camilla asked. "Already arranged," the woman replied. "The story will break tomorrow morning. Photos from her university days have been doctored to make her appear thinner. Combined with carefully planted sources discussing her struggles, it should create enough media chaos to keep her occupied with damage control." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. The malicious rumors that had been circulating about her health weren't random gossip. They were orchestrated attacks designed to undermine her credibility and distract her from uncovering the truth. Excellent, Camilla said with satisfaction. And the documentary crew? They believe they're creating a puff piece about your charitable work. They have no idea they're actually filming a carefully constructed narrative that will position you as Diana's true spiritual successor. The final edit will make it appear that Diana herself would have wanted you to oversee her memorial fund. Captain Whitmore watched Charlotte's face transform from shock to something harder, more determined. He recognized that expression. It was the same one he'd seen on Princess Diana's face years ago when she'd discovered certain uncomfortable truths about the institution she'd married into. The girl's idealism will be her downfall, Camilla continued. She actually believes the monarchy should serve the people rather than ourselves. Such naivety. Once she realizes how little power she actually has, she'll fall in line like the rest of them. And if she doesn't, then we'll ensure the public sees her as unstable, unreliable. A few more strategic leaks about mental health struggles, perhaps some carefully orchestrated public missteps. The press loves nothing more than tearing down a young royal who gets too big for her britches. Charlotte had heard enough. She turned to leave, but Captain Whitmore caught her arm gently. "Your Royal Highness," he whispered. "There's something else you need to know." She looked at him with questioning eyes, wondering how this nightmare could possibly get worse. "I have evidence," he said quietly. "Bank statements, correspondence, meeting minutes. I've been documenting everything for months, waiting for the right moment." "Why?" she whispered back. "Because my oath was to protect the crown and its integrity, not to enable its corruption. And because—" he paused, his professional composure slipping slightly. "Because I served your grandmother. I know what she would have wanted." Inside the office, chairs scraped against the floor, indicating the meeting was ending. Charlotte and Captain Whitmore quickly moved away from the door, but not before she heard Camilla's final words. "Remember, everything we've discussed stays in this room. The future of the monarchy depends on maintaining the proper order of succession and influence. Charles won't live forever, and when William becomes king, I intend to be the power behind the throne through him, not his children." As footsteps approached the door, Charlotte ducked into an adjacent alcove with Captain Whitmore following. A moment later, a middle-aged woman in an expensive suit emerged from the office, followed by Camilla. Charlotte had never seen the woman before, but she memorized every detail of her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton," Camilla said. "Your services to the crown are invaluable." "Always a pleasure, Your Majesty. The amended documents will be filed first thing Monday morning." After they parted ways, Charlotte waited several minutes before emerging from her hiding place. Her mind was reeling from everything she'd heard. The woman she'd been taught to respect and obey was not only stealing from her grandmother's memory, but actively working to destroy her family's legacy and future. "Captain," she said quietly, "that evidence you mentioned, how detailed is it?" "Comprehensive, Your Royal Highness. Bank transfers, forged signatures, meeting recordings. Everything needed to expose the truth." Charlotte stood in the dimly lit corridor, feeling the weight of the crown jewels she'd never yet worn but would one day inherit. Except, if Camilla's plan succeeded, there might be very little left to inherit. "Why haven't you come forward before now?" she asked. Captain Whitmore's expression grew grave. "Because accusations against the Queen Consort require irrefutable proof and the right timing. One mistake, and not only would the evidence be dismissed, but anyone involved in bringing it forward would be destroyed professionally and personally. And now, Your Royal Highness, you've heard the truth with your own ears. You're no longer an unknowing victim, you're a witness. The question is, what are you prepared to do about it?" Charlotte looked down the long corridor toward her private quarters, then back toward Camilla's office. In the space of 30 minutes, her entire understanding of her family, her future, and her role had been shattered and rebuilt. "I need to see everything," she said finally. "Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence you have. That can be arranged, but, Your Royal Highness, once you see it all, there's no going back. You'll be committed to a course of action that will change everything." Charlotte thought about her grandmother Diana's legacy being perverted for personal gain, about her brother's futures being stolen, about the monarchy being corrupted from within. She thought about the promises she'd made at her confirmation to uphold truth and justice. "Then, so be it," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Schedule a meeting for tomorrow evening. somewhere private, away from the palace. Your Royal Highness, if I may suggest, my cottage in Windsor Great Park. It's secure, and we can speak freely there. Perfect. And Captain? She turned to face him fully. Thank you. I know this puts you at tremendous risk. Some things are worth the risk, Your Royal Highness. Your grandmother taught me that. As Charlotte made her way back to her quarters, her mind was already working, formulating a plan. She had 24 hours to prepare herself for what was coming. Tomorrow night, she would see the full scope of Camilla's betrayal. Then, she would have to decide how far she was willing to go to protect her family's honor and the integrity of the crown itself. The rain continued to fall against the palace windows, and somewhere in the building, Camilla was probably congratulating herself on another successful manipulation. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated Princess Charlotte's determination and overestimated her own invincibility. The game was about to change, and this time, Charlotte intended to write the rules. The next evening, Charlotte drove herself to Windsor Great Park in her modest Honda Civic, having dismissed her usual security detail with a carefully crafted excuse about needing space to prepare for an upcoming speech. The cottage Captain Whitmore had mentioned sat tucked away behind a grove of ancient oak trees, invisible from the main road, and perfect for a clandestine meeting. As she approached the front door, Charlotte's hands trembled slightly. In the past 24 hours, she'd barely slept, her mind cycling through everything she'd overheard. She'd gone through the motions of her scheduled activities, a children's hospital visit, a meeting with Commonwealth representatives, but her thoughts had been elsewhere, preparing for this moment. Captain Whitmore answered the door before she could knock, his casual clothes making him look younger, more approachable than his usual formal uniform allowed. Your Royal Highness, he said, stepping aside to let her in. Thank you for coming. The cottage was warm and inviting, with exposed beams and a crackling fireplace. On the coffee table, Charlotte noticed several manila folders, a laptop, and what appeared to be recording equipment. Before we begin, Captain Whitmore said, I want you to understand something. What you're about to see will fundamentally change how you view people you've trusted your entire life. Are you certain you're ready for that? Charlotte settled into an armchair across from him, her back straight, channeling the poise her tutors had spent years instilling in her. I've been thinking about that all day, she replied. My grandmother Diana once said that truth is the only thing worth fighting for, even when it's painful. I can't honor her memory while ignoring what's being done in her name. Captain Whitmore nodded and opened the first folder. Let me start with the financial evidence, he said, spreading documents across the table. These are bank statements from accounts linked to the Diana Memorial Foundation, dating back 3 years. Charlotte leaned forward, studying the papers. At first glance, they looked like standard charity financial reports, but as Captain Whitmore guided her through them, a disturbing pattern emerged. Here, he said, pointing to a series of transactions, you can see regular transfers to something called Pemberton Consulting Services. The same woman from yesterday's meeting. What does this consulting company actually do? Charlotte asked. Ostensibly, they provide administrative services to various charities. In reality, they're a shell company that exists solely to launder money from the memorial fund into accounts controlled by Camilla's family members. He pulled out another document, this one showing a complex web of financial connections. Mrs. Pemberton's company receives the money from the foundation, then distributes it through a network of other shell companies, here, and here, before it ultimately lands in accounts belonging to Camilla's son Tom, her daughter Laura, and several of her close friends. Charlotte studied the papers, her anger growing with each revelation. How much money are we talking about? Over the past 3 years, approximately £22 million. Money that was donated by grieving individuals who wanted to honor your grandmother's memory. The number hit Charlotte like a physical blow. £22 million that should have gone to the causes Diana had championed. Homelessness, AIDS research, children's charities, instead filling the pockets of people who had never shown an ounce of genuine care for her grandmother's legacy. How did you discover this? She asked. Captain Whitmore's expression grew troubled. Initially by accident. I was reviewing security protocols for a charity gala when I noticed some irregularities in the guest list. People with no apparent connection to charitable work, but significant financial relationships with the foundation. When I investigated further, he opened his laptop and pulled up a series of email exchanges. I found these communications between Camilla and Mrs. Pemberton discussing operational adjustments to the foundation structure. The language was deliberately vague, but when combined with the financial records, The pattern became clear. Charlotte read through the emails, her disgust mounting with each message. They discussed her grandmother's memorial fund as if it were their personal piggy bank, showing no respect for either Diana's memory or the donor's intentions. But this is just the beginning. Captain Whitmore continued grimly. The financial theft, while appalling, isn't the worst of it. He opened another folder, this one containing legal documents. These are copies of your family's trust documents, the originals that your father signed when you and your brothers were born, and the amended versions that Mrs. Pemberton has been preparing. Charlotte compared the two sets of documents, her heart sinking as she realized the implications. In the original trust, she and her brothers were set to inherit equal shares of their father's considerable wealth when he passed away. In the amended version, their inheritance had been reduced to token amounts, with the vast majority of the wealth flowing to Camilla's control. She can't just change these without my father's permission, Charlotte said, though her voice lacked conviction. Technically, no, Captain Whitmore agreed. But Mrs. Pemberton specializes in estate law and has developed methods of encouraging compliance. According to these recordings, he activated a small digital recorder, and Camilla's voice filled the room. Charles is becoming increasingly forgetful. His doctor agrees that stress could be affecting his cognitive function. With the right documentation, we can establish that he's not mentally competent to make major financial decisions. The amended trust would be implemented for his own protection. Charlotte's blood ran cold. She's planning to have my father declared mentally incompetent. It appears so. And, with that declaration, she would gain legal control over not just the trust funds, but all royal assets and properties that aren't directly controlled by Parliament. Another recording began to play, this one more recent. The beauty of it is that the children will never suspect, Camilla's voice continued. They'll assume their reduced inheritance is due to estate taxes or charitable commitments. By the time they realize the truth, if they ever do, it will be far too late to challenge anything. Charlotte stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the darkening park. The magnitude of the conspiracy was staggering, not just theft, but a systematic dismantling of her family's legacy and future. There's more, Captain Whitmore said softly. She turned back to him, wondering how this could possibly get worse. The media campaign against you isn't random, he said, producing a thick file. Mrs. Pemberton doesn't just handle legal and financial matters. She also coordinates what she calls reputation management services. The file contained detailed dossiers on various British tabloid journalists and editors, along with records of payments made to them for specific stories. The eating disorder rumors, the suggestions that you're mentally unstable, the stories questioning your dedication to royal duties, all orchestrated and paid for. Charlotte flipped through the documents, seeing her life dissected and distorted by professionals whose job was to destroy her credibility. Why target me specifically? Why not William or my brothers? Because you're seen as the most independent-minded, the most likely to question authority and dig for truth. Your brothers are more focused on their military careers and personal lives. William is already in Camilla's sphere of influence through your father. But you, he paused. You ask uncomfortable questions. Captain Whitmore pulled up another recording, this one featuring Mrs. Pemberton's voice. Princess Charlotte represents the greatest threat to long-term control, she was saying. She's popular with the public, articulate, and has inherited her grandmother's instinct for connecting with people. If she ever discovered what we're doing, she'd have the platform and credibility to expose everything. Then, we make sure she doesn't get that opportunity, Camilla replied. A princess with a history of mental health struggles, eating disorders, and erratic behavior can't be trusted with serious responsibilities. The public won't listen to someone they see as unstable. Charlotte sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the calculated cruelty of it all. They've been planning my destruction for years, she whispered. Yes, Captain Whitmore said simply. But they made a crucial mistake. Which is, they assumed you would be passive, that you would accept their narrative and retreat from public life. They didn't count on you fighting back. Charlotte looked at all the evidence spread before her. Bank statements, legal documents, recordings, media payments. It was comprehensive, damning, and absolutely terrifying. What happens if we expose this? She asked. I mean, really, what are the consequences? Captain Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. For Camilla? Criminal charges for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Immediate removal from all royal duties. Public disgrace, and likely imprisonment. And for the monarchy? that's the complicated part. The scandal would be enormous. The idea that the queen consort was systematically stealing from charities and manipulating legal documents, it could seriously damage public trust in the entire institution. Charlotte understood the dilemma. Exposing Camilla would protect her family's legacy and honor her grandmother's memory, but it might also harm the monarchy her family had served for generations. However, Captain Whitmore continued, there's another way to look at it. The monarchy's survival depends on public trust and moral authority. Allowing this corruption to continue would be far more damaging in the long run than cleaning it up now. And, for my family personally, your father would be devastated, but ultimately protected. If we present the evidence carefully, he can be seen as another victim rather than an accomplice. Your brothers would have their inheritance restored. You would be vindicated of all the false accusations. Charlotte stood up again, this time with purpose rather than agitation. Captain, I need to ask you something directly. You've been collecting this evidence for months. You've taken enormous personal and professional risks. Why? What do you really want from me? Captain Whitmore met her gaze steadily. I want you to do what your grandmother would have done. I want you to fight for what's right, regardless of the personal cost. And I want to know that when history judges this moment, we stood on the side of truth. Charlotte walked back to the table and looked at all the evidence one more time. Tomorrow, she would have to make the most important decision of her life. If we do this, she said slowly, we'll need a strategy. We can't just dump all of this information and hope for the best. Agreed. And we'll need allies, people within the establishment who can't be bought or intimidated. I have some ideas about that, Charlotte said, her mind already working. But first, I need one night to process everything and make my final decision. Of course, Your Royal Highness. As Charlotte prepared to leave, she turned back to Captain Whitmore. Thank you, she said simply, for your loyalty to my grandmother's memory, and for trusting me with the truth. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for having the courage to hear it. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave Charlotte time to think. By the time she reached her private quarters, her course was set. Tomorrow, she would cross a line from which there would be no return. But some lines were meant to be crossed, and some truths were too important to remain buried. Her grandmother Diana had paid a heavy price for challenging the establishment, but she had also shown that one person with courage could change everything. Now it was Charlotte's turn to decide what kind of princess, and what kind of person, she wanted to be. Charlotte spent the night staring at her bedroom ceiling, watching shadows dance across the ornate molding as clouds passed over the moon. By dawn, her decision was made. She would expose Camilla's conspiracy, but she needed to do it strategically, with powerful allies who could withstand the inevitable counterattack. Her first call was to her private secretary, asking him to arrange a meeting with someone who had been her grandmother's closest confidant and remained one of the most respected figures in British public life, Lady Sarah Spencer, Diana's eldest sister. The meeting was set for that afternoon at Lady Sarah's London townhouse, an elegant Georgian building in Mayfair that had been in the Spencer family for generations. Charlotte arrived alone, having once again dismissed her security detail, claiming she needed privacy to discuss personal family matters. Lady Sarah greeted her at the door with a warm embrace. At 68, she retained the Spencer elegance and sharp intelligence that had made her a formidable presence in charity and social circles for decades. Charlotte, darling, she said, leading her into a sitting room adorned with family portraits, including several of Diana. You sounded quite urgent on the phone. What's troubling you? Charlotte settled into a velvet armchair across from her great-aunt, gathering her thoughts. Lady Sarah had always been direct, preferring honesty to diplomacy, which made her the perfect person for this conversation. Aunt Sarah, what I'm about to tell you will be shocking, and I'll need you to promise me that nothing leaves this room until we've decided on a course of action. Lady Sarah's expression grew serious. You have my word. Over the next hour, Charlotte laid out everything she'd learned. She shared the financial evidence, played selected recordings, and explained the scope of Camilla's manipulation. Lady Sarah listened with increasing horror, her composure cracking only when Charlotte described how Diana's memorial fund was being used. My God, Lady Sarah whispered when Charlotte finished. Diana always said Camilla was dangerous, but this is beyond anything I imagined. I need your help, Charlotte said simply. Not just your moral support, but your connections and your credibility. If I try to expose this alone, they'll destroy me with the same tactics they've been using. Lady Sarah stood and walked to a portrait of Diana taken during her engagement to Charles. She stared at it for a long moment before turning back to Charlotte. Your grandmother would be proud of your courage, she said. And, you're right, you can't do this alone. But, I know people who can help. Who did you have in mind? Lord Justice Morrison, for one. He's completely incorruptible and has the legal authority to order investigations that can't be buried. Lady Margaret Thornfield has connections in the press that go back 40 years. She can ensure the story is told properly rather than sensationalized. And Lady Sarah paused, considering her words carefully. And there's someone else who's been waiting for an opportunity like this. Someone inside the palace who's been documenting irregularities for years. Who? The Queen's private secretary, Sir Douglas Hamilton. He's served the crown for 30 years and has grown increasingly concerned about Camilla's influence. He's been building his own file of evidence, but, like Captain Whitmore, he's been waiting for the right moment and the right ally. Charlotte felt a surge of hope. If Sir Douglas was willing to support their cause, they would have someone with direct access to the highest levels of the monarchy. Can you arrange a meeting? Leave that to me. But, Charlotte, before we go any further, I need you to understand what you're really choosing. This isn't just about exposing Camilla. It's about fundamentally changing the balance of power within the royal family. There will be consequences that go far beyond what we can predict. I know, Charlotte replied. But the alternative is letting her succeed, which would be a betrayal of everything my grandmother stood for. Lady Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face and making her look remarkably like Diana in that moment. Then, we fight, she said simply. And we fight to win. 2 days later, Charlotte found herself in the oak-paneled study of Lord Justice Morrison's private residence in Belgravia. The retired judge, now in his 70s but still sharp as a razor, had listened to their evidence with the careful attention he'd once given to the most complex legal cases. Sir Douglas Hamilton sat beside him, a tall, distinguished man whose years of service to the crown were evident in every line of his face. He had brought his own file of evidence, which complemented and corroborated everything Charlotte had learned. The financial fraud is clear-cut, Lord Morrison said, reviewing bank statements. These shell companies exist for no legitimate purpose, and the money trail is undeniable. What concerns me more, Sir Douglas added, is the systematic manipulation of legal documents and the campaign to discredit Princess Charlotte. This suggests a level of organization and long-term planning that goes well beyond simple greed. Lady Margaret Thornfield, a silver-haired woman whose decades in journalism had given her an encyclopedic knowledge of British media, spread several newspapers across the coffee table. The media manipulation is particularly sophisticated, she said. These aren't random hit pieces. They're part of a coordinated strategy designed to gradually erode Charlotte's credibility and public standing. She pointed to a series of headlines spanning several months. Look at the progression. First, subtle suggestions about her dedication to royal duties. Then, hints about personal struggles. Now, increasingly direct attacks on her mental stability. It's textbook character assassination. Charlotte studied the headlines, seeing the pattern clearly for the first time. Each story built on the previous ones, creating a narrative of instability that would make her seem unreliable if she tried to expose the truth. How do we counter it, she asked. With irrefutable evidence and impeccable timing, Lady Margaret replied. We need to control the narrative from the beginning. Sir Douglas opened a leather portfolio and pulled out several official-looking documents. I've been in communication with the Crown's auditors, he said. They've been expressing concerns about certain financial irregularities for months, but their requests for additional documentation have been repeatedly delayed or denied. By whom? Lord Morrison asked. Mrs. Pemberton's office, acting on behalf of the Queen Consort. They claim the delays are due to the complexity of managing multiple charitable foundations, but the auditors suspect deliberate obstruction. Charlotte leaned forward. Could the auditors be brought into our alliance? Possibly, Sir Douglas replied. James Crawford, the senior auditor, is known for his integrity. If we presented him with compelling evidence of financial irregularities, he would be obligated to pursue a full investigation. That could provide the official cover we need, Lord Morrison observed. An investigation launched by the Crown's own auditors would have immediate credibility and legal protection. Lady Sarah, who had been quietly listening, now spoke up. There's something else we need to consider. Timing is crucial not just for media impact, but for political protection. The Prime Minister's relationship with the royal family is already strained due to several policy disagreements. If we can present this as an investigation rather than a family feud, he might be more supportive. Do you think he would be willing to meet with us? Charlotte asked. Not officially, Lady Margaret said. But his private secretary, David Hartwell, owes me several favors from his days as a junior minister. I could arrange an informal conversation. The group spent the next 2 hours developing a comprehensive strategy. They would approach this as a three-pronged attack: legal, through the Crown auditors, and Lord Morrison's connections in the judiciary; political, through carefully managed conversations with key government figures; and media, through Lady Margaret's network of trusted journalists. The key, Sir Douglas emphasized, is maintaining the appearance that this investigation emerged naturally from routine auditing processes, rather than from a specific allegation by Princess Charlotte. That protects you from immediate retaliation and gives the evidence more credibility. How long do we have before Camilla's next major move? Charlotte asked. Sir Douglas consulted his notes. According to internal memos, the amended trust documents are scheduled to be filed next week. Once that happens, reversing the changes becomes much more difficult. Then, we have 6 days, Lord Morrison said. 6 days to gather our allies, prepare our evidence, and launch a coordinated response. As the meeting concluded, Charlotte felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She was no longer facing this alone, but the stakes had become even higher. They weren't just exposing corruption, they were potentially reshaping the future of the monarchy itself. Lady Sarah walked her to the door, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Your grandmother faced moments like this too, she said softly. Times when doing the right thing required tremendous courage and sacrifice. Did she ever regret it? Charlotte asked. Never. She regretted many things in her life, but standing up for truth and justice wasn't one of them. As Charlotte drove back to Kensington Palace, she passed the memorial garden dedicated to Diana's memory. Soon, she would know whether her grandmother's legacy would be preserved or perverted by those who sought to profit from it. The next morning, Charlotte received a carefully worded email from Sir Douglas. The Queen's auditors have requested an urgent meeting to discuss irregularities in charitable foundation accounts. Your presence may be required as a foundation board member. The game was now in motion. In less than a week, either Charlotte would have successfully exposed one of the most significant royal scandals in modern history, or she would find herself destroyed by the very people she'd trusted to protect her family's honor. But, for the first time since overhearing that conversation in Camilla's office, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The power that came from fighting for something bigger than herself. The confrontation came sooner than expected. On Tuesday morning, 3 days before the scheduled audit meeting, Charlotte received an urgent summons to Clarence House for what was described as a family discussion regarding recent concerns. She knew immediately that their investigation had been discovered. Captain Whitmore met her in the courtyard, his expression grim. Your Royal Highness, I should inform you that Mrs. Pemberton arrived an hour ago with several briefcases. Security cameras show her entering with what appeared to be document shredders. Charlotte's heart sank. They're destroying evidence. It appears so. However, Sir Douglas managed to secure copies of several critical documents before they could be removed from the main archives. As they walked toward the entrance, Charlotte steeled herself for what promised to be the most difficult conversation of her life. She was about to confront Camilla directly, armed with irrefutable evidence of her crimes. But she was walking into the older woman's territory. The drawing room where they typically held family meetings felt different today. Camilla sat in the high-back chair usually reserved for Charles, her posture regal, but her eyes cold and calculating. Mrs. Pemberton stood behind her like a sentinel, surrounded by legal documents and files. Charlotte, darling, Camilla said with false warmth, please sit down. We need to discuss some very troubling developments. Charlotte remained standing. If you're referring to the investigation into the Diana Memorial Foundation, then, yes, we should definitely discuss that. Camilla's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the steel beneath. Investigation? I think you may be confused, dear. We're here to discuss your recent erratic behavior and the concerning reports about your mental state. Mrs. Pemberton stepped forward, holding a thick folder. Princess Charlotte, we have documented evidence of increasingly unstable behavior patterns. Missed appointments, inappropriate outbursts, paranoid accusations against family members. Interesting, Charlotte replied calmly. Because I have documented evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to manipulate inheritance documents. The room fell silent. Camilla's carefully composed expression finally cracked, revealing the fury beneath. I don't know what delusions you've been entertaining, she said, her voice sharp, But making wild accusations against the queen consort is not just inappropriate. It's potentially treasonous. Charlotte pulled out her phone and activated a recording app. Then, you won't mind if I record your response to some specific questions. Put that away immediately, Mrs. Pemberton snapped. This conversation is privileged family business. Actually, it's not, Charlotte replied. Because as of this morning, the Crown's auditors have officially opened an investigation into financial irregularities in several royal charities. This is now a legal matter, not a family dispute. Camilla stood abruptly, her composure completely gone. You little bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've exposed a criminal conspiracy, Charlotte said simply. One that has stolen over £22 million from charities meant to honor my grandmother's memory. Your grandmother, Camilla spat, was a naive idealist who nearly destroyed the monarchy with her publicity-seeking behavior. Everything I've done has been to protect this institution from similar damage. By stealing from children's hospitals and AIDS research foundations, by ensuring that resources are managed by people with actual understanding of how power works in the real world, rather than sentimental children who think good intentions are enough. Charlotte looked at this woman she'd been taught to respect, seeing her clearly for the first time. You're admitting to the theft? I'm admitting to nothing, Mrs. Pemberton interjected quickly, but Camilla waved her off. No, let's be honest for once, Camilla said, moving closer to Charlotte. Yes, I redirected funds from various charitable accounts into more practical uses. Yes, I've arranged for certain legal documents to be adjusted to reflect realistic power structures. And, yes, I've managed your public image to prevent you from causing the same kind of damage your grandmother did. You mean you've been systematically stealing money and orchestrating media attacks to destroy my credibility? I've been protecting the crown from another Diana Spencer disaster, Camilla shot back. Do you think the monarchy survived for 1,000 years by allowing every romantic idealist to undermine its authority? Charlotte kept her recording running, knowing that every word was potential evidence. And my father? Does he know about any of this? For the first time, Camilla looked uncomfortable. Your father is dealing with significant stress. His judgment regarding financial matters has become increasingly unreliable. You mean you've been manipulating him while planning to have him declared mentally incompetent? I mean, I've been protecting him from making decisions that could jeopardize the stability of the crown. Mrs. Pemberton was frantically signaling Camilla to stop talking, but the queen consort was beyond caring about discretion. You want to know the truth, Charlotte? Here's the truth. You and your brothers are relics of a fantasy your grandmother created. This idea that royalty should actually serve the people, that we should live modest lives devoted to charity work. It's naive nonsense that ignores how real power functions. So you decided to steal that power for yourself. I decided to prevent the monarchy from becoming a meaningless charitable organization run by children who have no understanding of political reality. Charlotte stopped the recording and put her phone away. Thank you for being so honest. What are you going to do? Camilla asked, suddenly, seeming to realize the implications of what she'd just said. I'm going to ensure that every word you just spoke reaches the appropriate authorities, Charlotte replied. The auditors, the judiciary, and the media. You'll destroy yourself, Mrs. Pemberton warned. We have extensive documentation of your mental instability. No one will believe the accusations of someone with a proven history of psychological problems. Actually, they will, Charlotte said with satisfaction. Because I'm not making the accusations alone. At that moment, the door opened and Sir Douglas Hamilton entered, followed by Lord Justice Morrison and two men Charlotte didn't recognize, but whose official bearing suggested they were investigators of some kind. Your Majesty, Sir Douglas said formally to Camilla, these gentlemen are from the Serious Fraud Office. They have some questions regarding financial irregularities in several royal charities. Camilla's face went pale. This is highly irregular. I demand to speak with my legal counsel. Of course, one of the investigators replied politely. But I should inform you that we have warrants to seize all documents related to the Diana Memorial Foundation, the Prince's Trust, and several other charitable organizations. Mrs. Pemberton moved toward her briefcases, but the second investigator stepped smoothly into her path. I wouldn't recommend that, ma'am. Destroying evidence during an active investigation is a serious criminal offense. Charlotte watched as Camilla's carefully constructed world began to collapse around her. The woman who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just minutes ago now looked small and desperate. This is all a terrible misunderstanding, Camilla said, trying to regain her composure. Any irregularities in the charitable accounts can be easily explained. I'm sure they can, Lord Morrison said dryly. That's precisely what we intend to investigate. As the investigators began examining documents and preparing to seize evidence, Charlotte found herself face to face with Camilla one last time. You think you've won, Camilla said quietly, her voice filled with venom. But destroying me won't restore your grandmother's precious legacy. The damage to the monarchy from this scandal will be irreversible. Maybe, Charlotte replied. But at least it will be honest damage, caused by confronting the truth rather than enabling lies. Your father will never forgive you for this. My father is a victim in this, just like my brothers and me. When he understands what you've been doing in his name, he'll be grateful that someone had the courage to stop it. As Charlotte left Clarence's house, she felt a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The confrontation she'd been dreading was over, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. Exposing Camilla's crimes was only the first step in a process that would fundamentally change the royal family and possibly the monarchy itself. Captain Whitmore was waiting by her car, his expression reflecting her own complex emotions. How do you feel, Your Royal Highness? Charlotte looked back at the building where she'd just ended one chapter of her life and begun another. Like I finally understand what my grandmother meant when she said that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to stay silent. The media storm would begin within hours. The investigations would take months to complete. The full ramifications for the monarchy would unfold over years. But for the first time since overhearing that conversation in Camilla's office, Charlotte felt like she could breathe freely. The truth, however painful, was finally coming to light. And somewhere, she hoped, Diana Spencer was proud of the granddaughter who had refused to let her memory be corrupted by those who had never understood what she truly represented. 3 months later, Charlotte stood in the same memorial garden where she'd often walked while contemplating her grandmother's legacy. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her feet as she made her way to the dedication ceremony that would mark a new chapter for the Diana Memorial Foundation, one cleansed of corruption and restored to its original purpose. The investigation had moved swiftly once the evidence became public. Camilla's recorded confession, combined with the financial documentation and testimony from Sir Douglas and Captain Whitmore, had made prosecution straightforward. Mrs. Pemberton had attempted to claim immunity as legal counsel, but her role in actively facilitating the fraud had negated any professional protections. The media coverage had been intense, but largely supportive of Charlotte's actions. Lady Margaret Thornfield had orchestrated the story's release perfectly, presenting Charlotte not as a vindictive family member, but as a principled young royal who had sacrificed personal comfort to protect charitable causes and institutional integrity. Your Royal Highness, a familiar voice said behind her. Charlotte turned to find James Crawford, the senior auditor whose investigation had provided the legal framework for everything that followed. Mr. Crawford, she replied warmly. Thank you for coming today. I wouldn't miss it. The Foundation's restoration is one of the most satisfying outcomes I've seen in 30 years of auditing work. They walked together toward the pavilion where the ceremony would take place. Charlotte could see her father in the distance, speaking with Lord Justice Morrison and several charity representatives. The past 3 months had been difficult for Charles, but ultimately liberating. Learning the truth about Camilla's manipulation had been painful, but it had also freed him from years of subtle gaslighting and control. How is he doing? Crawford asked, following her gaze. Better, Charlotte replied honestly. The divorce proceedings are moving forward amicably, all things considered. And he's thrown himself into reforming the oversight systems for all royal charities. And you? The media attention must have been overwhelming. Charlotte smiled, remembering the weeks of constant scrutiny and speculation that had followed the scandal's revelation. It was challenging, but also clarifying. For the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was and what I stood for. As they approached the pavilion, Charlotte noticed Captain Whitmore in his dress uniform, supervising security arrangements. Their eyes met across the crowd, and he gave her a small, proud nod. He had been quietly promoted to head of Royal Protection Services, a recognition of both his integrity and his loyalty to the Crown's true values. Lady Sarah Spencer approached them, elegant as always, but with a lightness in her step that hadn't been there during their clandestine meetings months earlier. Charlotte, darling, she said, embracing her great niece. Are you ready for this? I think so, Charlotte replied. Though I never imagined I'd be giving a speech about financial transparency and institutional accountability at a memorial service. Diana would have loved it, Lady Sarah said with a laugh. She always said the royal family needed more accountants and fewer protocol specialists. The ceremony began with a moment of silence for Diana's memory, followed by a report on the foundation's newly restored financial health. Over £15 million had been recovered from the various shell companies and accounts controlled by Camilla's network. Additional donations had poured in from supporters impressed by Charlotte's commitment to transparency. When Charlotte stepped to the podium, she looked out at an audience that included charity workers, donors, government officials, and journalists. For a moment, she thought about the terrified young woman who had hidden in palace corridors 3 months ago, afraid to confront the truth she'd overheard. My grandmother believed that service to others was not just a duty, but a privilege, she began, her voice clear and strong. She understood that people who donate to charitable causes are making an act of faith that their contributions will reach those who need them most. She paused, allowing her words to settle over the audience. That faith was betrayed by people who saw charitable giving as an opportunity for personal enrichment rather than public service. But today, we restore that faith and recommit ourselves to the principles that should guide all charitable work: transparency, accountability, and genuine dedication to helping others. As she continued speaking about the Foundation's new oversight mechanisms and expanded programs, Charlotte felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy settling comfortably on her shoulders. This was what Diana had meant about service, not just ceremony and ribbon cutting, but the hard work of ensuring that good intentions translated into real results. After the ceremony, Charlotte found herself in conversation with David Hartwell, the Prime Minister's private secretary who had helped coordinate the government's response to the scandal. "The PM wanted me to tell you how much he appreciated your handling of this situation," Hartwell said. "A lesser person might have pursued personal vendetta rather than institutional justice." "I had excellent advisors," Charlotte replied, glancing toward where Sir Douglas was deep in conversation with several parliamentary representatives. "Speaking of which, there's been some discussion about expanding your role in charitable oversight. Would you be interested in chairing a new commission on royal charity governance?" Charlotte considered the offer. It would mean more responsibility, more scrutiny, and certainly more paperwork. But it would also mean ensuring that what happened with Camilla could never happen again. "I'd be honored," she said. As the afternoon wore on, Charlotte found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that rainy night when she'd first overheard Camilla's conspiracy. The royal family structure remained the same, but its priorities had shifted. Transparency and accountability were no longer suggestions, but requirements. Camilla herself was awaiting trial, having been denied bail due to flight risk concerns. Mrs. Pemberton had already been convicted on multiple fraud charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Several journalists had been fined for accepting payments in exchange for publishing false stories, leading to industry-wide discussions about media ethics. But perhaps the most significant change was in Charlotte herself. The young woman who had once doubted her own perceptions and feared confronting authority had become someone willing to challenge corruption regardless of its source or status. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to disperse, Charlotte walked once more through the memorial garden. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the pathways her grandmother had once loved. Captain Whitmore approached, having completed his security duties. "Your Royal Highness, if I may say so, Princess Diana would be proud of what you accomplished today." "We accomplished," Charlotte corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "True leadership is knowing when to accept help and when to stand alone," he replied. "You've demonstrated both qualities admirably." As Charlotte prepared to leave, she noticed a small plaque that had been added to the memorial garden during the restoration process. It read, "Truth is the only thing worth fighting for, even when it's painful. Princess Diana." She had never found record of her grandmother actually saying those exact words, but they captured Diana's spirit so perfectly that their precise origin didn't matter. What mattered was that they had guided Charlotte through the most challenging period of her life, and would continue to guide her in the years to come. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave Charlotte time to think about the future. The Commission on Charity Governance would be demanding work, but it was work that mattered. She would also be returning to her regular royal duties, but with a new understanding of what those duties truly meant. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother William. "Watch the ceremony online. Proud of you. Dad says dinner Sunday if you're free." Charlotte smiled as she typed her response. Wouldn't miss it. The scandal had brought pain and disruption to her family, but it had also brought them closer together. Her father was more present, and engaged than he'd been in years, freed from Camilla's manipulative influence. Her brothers had rallied around her during the worst of the media attention, showing a solidarity that had sometimes been missing in their relationships. As she pulled into the palace grounds, Charlotte reflected on a conversation she'd had with Lady Sarah the previous week. "Do you ever regret exposing everything?" Lady Sarah had asked. "Never," Charlotte had replied without hesitation. "I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing what was right." Now, sitting in her car as evening settled over London, Charlotte felt the truth of those words in her bones. The path she'd chosen had been difficult and sometimes lonely, but it had led to justice, restoration, and a renewed sense of purpose. She looked up at the windows of her private quarters, where warm light spilled out onto the courtyard below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight, she would rest in the knowledge that she had honored her grandmother's memory and protected the integrity of the crown. The young woman who had once hidden in palace corridors, afraid of her own shadow, was gone. In her place stood Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Windsor, a royal who understood that true nobility came not from titles or tiaras, but from the courage to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. And in that understanding, Diana Spencer's greatest legacy lived on, not in stolen millions or manipulated headlines, but in a granddaughter who had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when confronted with injustice. The truth had set them all free, just as her grandmother had always said it would.